All right, welcome to this next episode of Coding Reversi for the Web. In this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to set up some of the entrance pages to our web application in preparation for getting the rest of the game going. In our previous work, what we did was we set up a little bit of a development ecosystem. And the different components are shown here in this diagram. We've got our local computer down here, and on our local computer we have our file system, just our files on our computer, and one of those files is server.js. Server.js is a Node program, that's a Node.js program that we can run on our own machine, or if we decide to check it into our Git repository and use a program like SourceTree, which manages Git, and we push those changes out to GitHub and our repository there, Heroku will be notified. We'll download the information from the repository, and we'll have a equivalent copy of server.js and the file system placed in the cloud that matches what we have on our development machine. Heroku will then run the server.js in the cloud so that from our web browser, we can access it on this cloud platform using a URL, something like this. This is like mine. It's not exactly what Heroku gives me. If we're also running that same server.js program on our local machine, we can also use that same web browser to access it using a local host address with a special port 8080. We do this connection when we're doing development before we want the world to be able to see what we've done. And when we're comfortable with what we've made, we push it out to GitHub so that the rest of the world can see it. Because not just our computer is able to access this location, but anyone can access that location as it's considered right now. Also, previously, we went through the concept of what we're building overall here, and we put it into a little bit of a wireframe diagram. What we're going to be working on in this video is we're going to be setting up the intro page here, this index.html. We're going to have some buttons that link to an about page, and we're going to link to the Wikipedia entry. We're going to save the lobby and the rest of this component for future lectures because those contain a kind of a different kind of approach. We're going to be doing some programming to set those up, and it'll take more effort than what we're doing right now. So I'm going to change the look a little bit of this. We're going to create an index.html file that is going to be the kind of landing splash page for our game. We'll have about and a rules button at the top. We'll have a spot for a logo. We'll have a form where we can enter our username, and then a button that'll take us to the lobby where we can meet other players and play with them there. And then on the bottom, we'll have a spot for another logo or whatever kind of graphic you'd like. Now, as we make this, I'm going to show you a particular layout for how to do it, but really the only thing that's critical to have is this name place where you can enter your username and then a lobby button so that you can go to the next round. You can change the look and feel and the aesthetics however you'd like, and I encourage you to do that. If you're following along for a course that I'm teaching, I'm going to ask you to also implement the About and the Rules button, but again, the layout isn't quite as critical as long as you have those features in there. When we lay this out, we're going to use Bootstrap, and we're going to lay it out in 4 different rows. The first row having 2 buttons, then the logo, responsive image, a third row having our form, and then the final row having a responsive image as well. All right, so to do that, let's jump into Visual Studio Code and go from there. Let's look at what our existing set of files has in it now. So I'm going to open up a Finder window, and I'm going to go to my repository. It's going to be in a different place on your computer, but if you've been following along, it should look something like this directory right here. You should have the node modules, the package.json, these files giving you indication, giving Heroku and your own computer indication about what kind of setup you have for your application. Procfile tells Heroku how to launch your program with web node server.js. Our public directory contains all of the resources and assets that we will deliver to people who access our web application. And so right now it has just a blank index.html file, which we set up last time, that just says, let me get that out. Just says hello world. All right, we've got README and then server.js, which is the program that does the delivery of our content. So let's, where should we start? Let's start by opening Visual Studio Code and accessing the index.html file. So I'm going to start Visual Studio Code. And I should already be loaded up here. Looks like it lost track of where I am. So I'm going to go ahead and load up my repository. All right, open it up, get those files on the left. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start over with the new index.html. This is the one that we had last time, and what's kind of interesting is since the last lecture I filmed, and this one, Bootstrap has updated its code, and the template file has changed as well. So I'm going to open a new window, and I'm going to go to Bootstrap. Go to Get Started, scroll down to the starter template, copy that, and then go back to Visual Studio Code. In the index file here, I'm just going to select everything, and I'm going to paste the, oops, I just messed it up. Copy that, select everything, and then paste that code there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and just clean up what we've got here, make sure I understand what's happening. We've got HTML and head. We've got some meta tags, our Bootstrap CSS, hello world. Let's go ahead and change this so it says Reversi. H1, this is all where we're going to change stuff in a second. And we'll go ahead and stick with option 1 there for our Bootstrap. All right, save that. And let's just put hello world there and then make sure that this is running okay. So in order to get it to run, we need to run our node server in our environment. We can do that from a command line. You can actually do that from Visual Studio Code as well, but I'll do it from a terminal window here so that we can see it. All right, so I am in the directory right now where my files are, and server.js is there, and the public subfolder has the index.html. And if I run node server.js, that will launch my web server, and then I can use a browser. Here's Chrome. I can use browser to see what's present in my file. So that's localhost loading up my content from my local hard drive and showing it in the directory, showing it in my browser. All right, so now coming back to my index.html file, what we're going to do is we're going to build out those components that we had previously, so that I showed you in the mock-up, so that we can have a place to start. So I'm going to get rid of hello world, and the first thing that we need for our responsive website is to have a container. So I'm going to create a div that has a container, and we're going to use container fluid. I'm going to use container fluid. And that's going to be our outer chunk that we've got. And I said that we're going to need 4 rows. So I'm going to create a div whose class is row. And that's 1. And there's 2. And there's 4. So there's 4 rows that we can work with in order to make our application. All right, so in that first row, let's put the About button and the Rules button. So when we have rows, we have to put things in, we have to put content in the columns, So let's create a column here, and let's create a matching div at the same time. All right, and what are we going to put in that, not a row, we're going to put something in a column. We're going to have 2 columns. We're going to have a column that contains our first button and a column that contains our second button. So here are 2 placeholders for that. Let's go ahead and put our first button in. It's going to be a tag or an anchor tag, which means it's going to be a link. And we're going to have it styled as a button by adding as its class the btn class. And we're going to tell it what color and what style of button to use. We're going to use button.success. Now, really what Bootstrap wants you to do is use these semantically. So it wants you to use the button-success for buttons that are for indicating that something successful has happened, like an OK button. But I'm actually using it just for the purposes of having color right now, a green color. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say use a class called text no wrap, and that is part of Bootstrap as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to prevent Bootstrap from wrapping the text in the button. So it'll keep the button sort of linear rather than scrunching up if the size of the web page changes. All right, and then we just have to indicate where we want to go if that button is clicked. And we're going to go to the about.html page, a page that we haven't created yet, but that we'll put next to our index.html. In the content of our button, we're going to put the word about, and then we've got a close a tag to close that out. Okay, so that's our first column. The only other thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the content in that column is centered. So I'm going to add a text center attribute to that column. All right, I'm going to copy that and add that in the second column as well. In this case, however, this is going to be the rules for our game. And for the rules, what I'm going to do is I'm going to point individuals to the Wikipedia page for the rules. And I've got that up here. Let me grab that and put that in here. Great. Clean everything up, put it on the same line. We've got, great, got a button, an about button, and a rules button, 2 columns, linking to an about page and to the Reversi page. All right, and so let's see, what else do I want to do about styling here? I want to do the same thing. I want the content to be centered in the column. I want it to not wrap. I think that's it. All right, so what I'm going to do here is let's take a look at how it looks. So I'm just going to put some text in row 2 and row 3 so we can see what we have working, and row 4. Let's save that out, and then let's switch over to our browser and reload and see what's present now. Great, we've got about buttons and we've got rule buttons as well. I'd like to put a little padding around there. I don't like the way that it's all the way mashed up at the top. So let's come back here, and I'm going to use a Bootstrap margin class, and I'm going to tell it to give it margin with 3 out of a scale of 5. I think Bootstrap gives you the option to add. So we come back here and we reload, and you can see it puts a little bit of a margin around those buttons, gives it a little bit of white space. I see. Speaking of white space, I see that the background's very white, so I'm going to change that out. I'm going to do a little inline style sheet in order to alter that. So up here in the head, let's add a style tag, and Visual Studio will close that for us. And here what we're going to say is we want the entire body of our document to have a background color, and Visual Studio is helping us out there. And let's, actually the first one there is pretty good. Let's use dark sea green, and you can click, if you're using Visual Studio, you can click there and change the color if you'd like. That will give background color to everything that's a child of the body, and I think that's pretty good. Let's reload, see how that looks. Great, I like that. All right, next thing, the next thing that we can do is let's add those images, those logo images. So that's going to be in row 2 and row 4, and what we want to do is we want to add images that are just kind of logo-y images, but we want it to be fluid or responsive images. So we need a column, just like before, and get rid of row 2, and then in here we're going to use the image tag. We're just going to say the source is going to come from somewhere. And we haven't done this yet, but we're going to build into our file system a couple subdirectories. So in the public subdirectory, we'll add a subfolder called assets, and we'll add another subfolder called images, and in that file we'll put the graphic top splash.png. And you can, whatever your graphic is called, you can call it that. Just make sure you remember where you're requesting it from. All right, and then for screen readers and for visually impaired, we'll add an alt tag, and we'll just say this is a Reversi logo number 1. The alt tag is helpful for a lot of reasons, but the motivation for putting it there is for visually impaired people who are using screen readers. All right, close out that tag, and let's see, is there anything else that we want to add to that image? Let's go ahead and give it some padding as well. So give it some padding around there. Let's center it as well. All right, center that column. And I think that's everything we need. All right, now if we go and we load this, it's not going to work because we don't have that asset there. So I'll refresh, and you can see a busted image, tile placeholder there. So let's go to our file system. You can do this from the command line, or you can do this from a file explorer like this. I'll go ahead and do it from the file explorer. I'm going to create a new folder, call it assets. And then in assets, I'm going to create a new folder called images. And then in images, I am going to put the two images that I'm going to need in order to render there. So let's go back to our file explorer. And I have them standing by. So let me grab them here. There we go. Okay, so you can see those 2 files are there. And as I back out, you can see that they're in that subdirectory located right there. So now this reference, where's my reference? My reference to assets images top splash.ping is in good shape. We also need to worry about that about page, but let's not worry about that quite yet. Let's go back to our image here, or go back to our template, our website, hit refresh, and we got that logo that was in that image file. All right, we've got a second splash that we want to add, so I'm going to go ahead and take these 3 lines of code, copy it down here to row 4, and we're going to change it from top splash to bottom splash. See how that came out? Refresh. Looks good. Oh, you know what? These images aren't fluid images, are they? I didn't actually add the class that makes them fluid images. So what do we need to do for that to happen is we need to add a class to these images, and we need to say it is an img-fluid image, meaning that it'll be responsive. And that's something that Bootstrap provides. That class is something that Bootstrap provides. Save it, go back to my website, reload it, and you can see that it adjusts for the size of the website that we've got. We can test the rules button. Good. Go back. And then our about button should go to a page that doesn't exist. Not yet. Good. We can go back. Now let's fill out row 3. Row 3 is going to be a little text input area where we can enter the user's name so that when they play the game, they have some kind of name that's going to be visible to the folks that are playing with them. All right, so we've got to do a couple things here. What we're going to do is we're going to create a column for starters, just like the other rows. And we'll make this just half the width. So we know that we have a 12-column system. And so if we have a column that spans 6 of those grid columns, then it'll be half the width of the screen. But we don't want it on the left half. We want it centered. So I'm going to go ahead and add up here a class justify content center, and that'll put it in the center of the screen, anything that's a child of it. All right, and in our 6 columns, we want to have something that describes what it is that we want our user to enter. So we're going to say span, and then the name, that's what we want them to enter. And then we're going to have them enter something. So we're going to use an input tag. Span is like a div tag that doesn't create a block. In the input, we're going to ask them to input something that is of type text. And we are going to start just by, just leave it blank. We need to add a bunch of other attributes to this in order to make it compliant with text readers and also to make it style correctly. But for now, we'll just put right there, input. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll put a button that is going to be our submit button so that when we click on this, we'll take the action of going into our game. So the type is a submit button. We'll put some classes on it to style it. We'll make it a button. We'll do button dash primary. And let's see, what else do we need to add to this? We also want this button's text not to wrap if it gets too small. And I think that's it for now. We'll say enter lobby is what we'll have on that button. All right, do we open and close all our tags? Well, we did. All right, so let's see what we've got now when we go back to our website, refresh. And you can see we've got an OK form here. But what we'd like to do is use some of that styling that Bootstrap offers. So the first thing I want to do is I want to align everything through the middle so that these 3 elements are lined up and down. So to do that, in my top here, I'm going to say give a class that will do that. And so that's align items center. And again, this is in the Bootstrap documentation if you want. And I think let's also give it a little bit of margin as well. See how that does for us. Good, cleaned it up a little bit. We won't really see the better. You see it got centered there. Okay, next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that all of these elements are treated as a form. So let's go ahead and add another class that will wrap all these elements. And that will say that everything that we've got here is going to be an input group. This is a Bootstrap container that will help us to style things better. All right, I'm going to indent this so visually you can see what we're doing. All right. Sorry, I'm getting wrapped around the axle with my formatting. There we go. All right, so we got an input group, and then we need to add some classes that work with that input group. So we'll span class, and we'll say this is going to be input group text. and give it that name, and we're going to need to identify it later. So let's give it an ID, and we'll call it name input. That's just for referencing later on. All right. In our input, we need to add some classes here. Let's style it. So first of all, let's tell Bootstrap that this is a form control, and we also don't want the text to wrap in it as well. And let's give it an ID. Let's see. Actually, I got this wrong. This is not the name input. This is the display name. We need that later. This one here is the name input. Make sure you have those in double quotes, any attributes in double quotes. Name input, good. And let's go ahead and see what we've got. Let's start there. Let's save it. See how things are changing. All right, looks pretty good. I don't want it kind of in 3 layers like that, so we're going to need to adjust that a little bit here. So to do that, let's see. What do I want to alter here? Let's get this set up so that it is accessible. Do a little bit better job here. So let's put some placeholder text in here. So for the placeholder, what I want to do is I want to have some faint text that says what you're supposed to do here. So choose your display name. Name. All right, and save that. And you can see what that does is add some background there. Choose your display name. That's kind of nice. And then we're going to add some connections for the accessibility. All right, so first thing, let's add a label to describe what this form is for and for text-to-speech readers. So Arial.label will say, enter your display name for use while playing Reversi. So that's what you do with this form. And then we're going to say that this form is described by aria-described by good, and then it's described by the text, the text previously on the span there. All right, looks good. Let me bring it all on the same line, and let's save it, and let's see how that adjusts things. All right, nothing visible. Okay, let me run through this. We've got our column, we've got our input group up. We have our input group. That div shouldn't be there. That's why we're not having things line up. Let's get rid of that extra div. There we go. That's what I was looking for. All right. I think that's almost everything we need. Let's give our lobby button an ID. Let's say this is going to be ID equal lobby button. We're going to need that in future videos so that we can access it. And just so that we can see that this works, let's go ahead and give it some action as well. So let's give it one more attribute called onClick. There we go. And when we click on it, we're going to change the location that our browser is looking at to be window.location is going to equal single quote lobby.html single quote. And we'll have to add that in a second here as another file. All right, so what we did there is we said that when we click on this button, we want the browser to jump to a different page. It's a little bit like doing a hypertext link, but it's doing it through JavaScript instead of the built-in browser commands. All right, just taking a second to look at those, make sure everything looks okay, make sure my formatting is all right. Visual Studio Code has the nice ability to auto-format for you, so let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to select everything. And then I'm going to select K, or do Option K and then Option F. And everything should be indented and lined up and clean. And if it's not, then you know that you have a problem. All right, save that. And let's see what our web app looks like. Great. And if we change the size of it, it should be pretty smooth. Images are flexing, that's good. Everything looks kind of centered, that's good. Jumps to the next level when it gets too small. And that right there, that position's not great. There's not a lot of space to enter in your text there. So let's make one change and make this column a little bit bigger. rather than making it 6, let's try making it, let's do 8. Let's reload that and see if we do any better. There we go. That gives us a little bit more space for entering our display name when it gets smaller before it jumps. There we go. Okay, that's good enough. All right, let's work on the other pages then that we need. We need an about page and we need a lobby page. So let's go ahead and make those. Maybe the easiest way to do that is just to copy the page that we've got here. Let's go ahead and copy that and then paste it. And let's give it a new name. We'll make our about page so that when we click on our about button, we'll go there. And let's just clean it up. Go through from the top. Reversi, we'll give it :about. And then as we come down here, didn't give a lot of thought about what we want this to look like. So let's just give this class a new class named header row. And then we'll, rather than making the whole content be that, we'll just say dot header row gets this color. All right. And then in this row, what do we want to put? We'll just say, we'll just put the text about up there. And we'll just have one column at the top that's green. And then in the next row, we'll say just whatever you want to put in there. This would be good for like your portfolio piece, but this is a game to demonstrate how web applications work. All right, clean up the images, clean up the other rows, keep the rest of Bootstrap there, keep our container there, save that. All right, let's see how that looks. Refresh our index page, hit about, and pretty good. We've got a basic about page. And then the last thing that we can do is we can add our lobby page. So let's copy that. And let's paste it in our public directory. And then let's rename it. And we'll rename it lobby.html. And we'll go from the top and, go from the top. What do we need to change? Come down here, change the title, Reversi : lobby on the title page, change about so that it says lobby. And then I'm just going to leave the rest of the page blank because we're going to be doing other stuff with the lobby in the future. All right, save that. Come back here. We can enter a display name and hit enter lobby, and then it kicks us over to the lobby. We can go back, and we're back in our splash screen. All right, so this is the basic structure that I wanted us to achieve. All of this is running on the local computer, though. So what I would like to do to demonstrate that it's working is to put it into our Git repository, push it to GitHub, and see that it works on Heroku. So I'm going to bring down my source tree instance here. And on source tree, I have got a couple branches, but what I'm going to click on is my uncommitted changes. The red line there is my main branch, is my main trunk. My blue branch is my prepping for this lecture, and I went back to the point before I did my prepping, and now I'm going to commit just like you would commit. So when you do this, you won't see your blue branch, you'll just see a continued commit node on your main branch. What sort of things are going to be in that commit? Well, you've got all these things down here. We know that we changed the index file, so that's the easiest one. We know that we added an about.html and we added lobby.html, so those need to be added. I also added some assets, so I added my splash images, the top and the bottom as well. Those are all ready to go, and so I'm going to go ahead and commit that, give a commit message that says creating the entrance pages. Let's spell it right, entrance pages. I will go ahead and commit those to my local repository. You can see another node got created there, and now I'm going to push it to GitHub. I want to push just the main branch to GitHub. Looks okay. Make sure everything goes all right. Great. All right. Let's go back to our web browser, and let's jump over to Heroku. I'm logged in at Heroku, and I'm going to go ahead and pick the app that I'm running here. hopefully it had enough time to react to the push to GitHub, and it has copied it over and run the new application. Let's see what happens. If I open my app, there it is running, and you can see that now I've got it running on my remote cloud-based platform. I can hit About, and I go to an About page. I can hit Rules, and I go to Wikipedia, and then I can enter a display name and go to my lobby page. And it works. All right, terrific. So that's what I wanted us to do. I wanted us to get through those entrance pages and get a good foundation using the infrastructure that we've built so that we can build out some of the game coming next. We're going to start picking up the pace rapidly here, so hopefully this wasn't too tough. Thank you for your attention. Looking forward to the next steps.